I think the Mikel Merino signing is a really important one for Arsenal, because if you cast your mind back to last season and you think about the period where Arsenal were dropping points, it was mainly in that first half of the campaign. And I think that was partly to do with Arsenal trying to move away from having had a natural number 8 on that left-hand side in Granit Xhaka, and then trying to shoehorn somebody like Kai Havertz into that position. And I think Mikel Arteta, over the course of the summer, would have looked back at that period and would have identified that exact problem, and then felt the need to go out and get someone who is a number 8 by trade and by nature. And that's why I think Mikel Merino is such an important signing, because he addresses a problem that was evident in the first half of the campaign for Arsenal last season. He's obviously a player who impressed everybody at the European Championships. I know he came off the bench a lot for Spain, but he showed everybody what he can do aerially, what he can do in terms of getting into the box late. And I think when you factor all of those things in, and his physical profile, which I think is not what you'd normally associate with a Spanish midfielder, I think all of that kind of just works together to make this perfect solution for Arsenal. In an ideal world, I don't think Arsenal would have wanted to pay what they did to get him. I think you look at his age and you look at the contract situation, and you could probably make a case that says Arsenal would have liked to have got him cheaper, but you can't always dictate these things. If you want a player, you have to go out and pay what's required sometimes, and that's probably why it's taken so long. But yeah, a signing that I'm really positive about. I think there's a chance that Mikel Merino could be used in a different way. I think he could be dropped into that 6th position if Arsenal are desperate, but I don't think he'd be at the front of the queue to replace Thomas Partey in that role if he was unavailable, which could happen. We all know about his injury history. I think Jorginho would be ahead of him in terms of just having that ability to progress the ball from deep. I think that somebody like Declan Rice would be dropped in there before Mikel Merino was looked at as that number 6 solution. Just because I think in the way that Arsenal play and in the way that they build up, it's really important that whoever sits at the base of the midfield has that ability to A, receive the ball under pressure, and then B, identify those forward passes, and C, execute them. And I think if you look at the data around Mikel Merino, that's probably one thing that you'd look at and flag: passing accuracy and sort of that ability to break lines with his passing. He doesn't quite rank among the very best in that department. So for that reason, I don't think he'd play there often, but it's certainly an option. I think when everybody's fit and available, Mikel Merino might not start, is the way I look at it. I think that Thomas Partey, when fit and close to his best, is a really, really important player to this Arsenal side. I don't think the club are willing to cast Declan Rice out of the starting 11, given what they paid for him and how good his first season was. And I think Martin Odegaard, being the club captain, is the first name on the team sheet every single week, maybe along with Bukayo Saka and William Saliba. So I think there's a world in which Mikel Merino is used as an impact player like he was for Spain, and is used as the guy that comes in and out, freshens things up. I think there will be certain games where Mikel Arteta might prefer to use Rice in the 6 and use Merino, because maybe he'll be worried about the mobility issue in that number 6 position if it's Partey or Jorginho, and obviously Rice doesn't have that problem. So yeah, there's a world in which he starts, but I'm not sitting here saying that he's going to start every week, because I don't think that would be the case. I think it's a signing that adds something to the Arsenal squad that was clearly missing last season. And if you think about what Arsenal are doing and have been doing over the last few years, there's been consistent progress. They've been moving forward every single year. And I think what Mikel Arteta has found is that he needs to have almost a weaponry that includes everything. And there will be situations where, he needed that more traditional number 8 and he didn't have it. I don't think he ever really trusted the likes of Emile Smith-Rowe in that position, maybe because he was lacking a bit physically. Certainly didn't trust Fabio Vieira, hence why he's allowed him to go out on loan. And now I look at it and I think with Kai Havertz having kind of found his feet at centre forward, you don't really want to be moving him out of that position. So could this be the signing that propels Arsenal to the title? Maybe. It certainly improves the squad, and ultimately as a manager, there are no guarantees in football, but you can work year upon year to make sure that you're in better shape, and Mikel Merino means that Arsenal are in a better position in terms of depth. I would be shocked if Arsenal were to move for Darwin Nunez now. I think he's a player that they were interested in before he joined Liverpool. There was a lot of talk about him. The price tag, I think, put Arsenal off in the end. Liverpool were willing to go that extra mile. They really believed he was the player for them. And I think he's someone who's blown hot and cold, if we're being completely honest, since arriving in the Premier League. I look at the example of Kai Havertz, a player that arrived in the Premier League. There were lots of question marks around, maybe wasn't performing at his absolute best. And the way Mikel Arteta's been able to bring him in, put his arm around him and get him performing at a really high level makes me confident that if he was to get Darwin Nunez, he could improve him. I think he's got a great track record, Mikel Arteta, of improving players. But I think this will be too difficult a deal to do. I don't know that Darwin Nunez is interested, and I certainly don't think that Arsenal would be willing to put up the money that Liverpool would demand to sell him to a direct rival. I think the fact that Darwin Nunez can play anywhere across the front line would be something that Mikel Arteta would value if he was to move for him. You know, we've seen lots of links to forwards over the course of the summer, some centre forwards, some wide players, and I think in an ideal world Arsenal would like to get someone that can do a bit of both. So that would certainly help. But I look at this deal and I just think it's too difficult to do with so little time left in the window. My ideal scenario would be to wake up tomorrow morning and find that Arsenal have triggered Nico Williams' release clause, because I think he was so impressive at the European Championships. He really, really did, prove his worth on the biggest stage. He consistently performed. He consistently took people on. He consistently scored goals, created goals. He just looks like he's got it all, Nico Williams, and he continues to improve year upon year. His release clause is something that I think is reasonable in terms of the value. You're talking about around about 50 million euros. I think that's something that I'd be happy to pay if I were a football club owner to get him in through the door. And obviously he looked like he was destined for Barcelona, but that didn't happen in the end. He's staying at Athletic Bilbao for now. And from what I understand, his relationship with Barcelona has soured a little bit. I don't think he was too happy with the information that they were leaking about the talks that were going on between them and his people. And I think Arsenal could potentially take advantage of that by going and triggering that release clause and really testing whether or not he's willing to move on from Athletic Bilbao. That's the dream scenario for me, but again, there's not a lot of time left to do this. The one I would absolutely love to get in is Alexander Isak, but again, it feels like a deal that would be really difficult to do. We know that Newcastle are in no great need of funds, therefore they're going to ask top dollar for Alexander Isak, and rightly so, because he's a really talented player. In terms of other options, I'm finding it really, really difficult to put specific names to people, and that's why I've really struggled with the last few days of this window, because I wake up in the morning and I'm scrolling through social media hoping that there's a link and hoping that there's someone that Arsenal are working on getting. But when people put that question to me, who should it be, I find that quite tough, which suggests that the market's quite tough, which means maybe we shouldn't be going overboard and being super critical of the club for not having done something. I know there are people paid to do that, to identify the right players. I know there are people whose jobs it is, but I don't think it's an easy market. Every deal seems to have dragged out throughout the summer. So I think to expect Arsenal to pull a rabbit out of the hat in the last few days of the window and produce this magical signing, I think is, maybe a little bit unfair. But there will be frustration if they don't get a forward in. There's no doubt about that. And if the goals dry up at some point in the season or injuries take a grip of the squad, then you can bet that people will be pointing back to this period at the end of August where we had an opportunity at least to sort that issue and prevent that problem from being a bigger problem and maybe costing us a title. Going into the summer, I was convinced that for Arsenal to compete in all the competitions that they're involved in, they would need to bring in 3 players. They would need to bring in a defender, preferably someone that could play left back. They've done that with Ricardo Calafiori. I thought they desperately needed a midfielder, preferably someone who was a left 8. They've addressed that with Mikel Merino. And the other thing I wanted was a forward, because I feel like we are short. Eddie Nketiah's leaving the club. There's talks that Reece Nelson could leave the club as well. Now, I'm not saying these are Arsenal level players, but these are players that are a part of the squad that we are about to lose. Therefore, you need to make sure that you have people coming in to support them. So I think for Arsenal to compete in all the competitions that we want to, we do need that forward option. And I think Gabriel Jesus' injury and the fact that we learned of that over the last week has really reminded me, and I think everybody else, of how fragile this forward situation actually is. The fact that someone who's had a full pre-season and was looking sharper than he has done for a couple of years has picked up this injury, that rings alarm bells. And I think because of that, everybody's feeling quite desperate now with regards to bringing in a forward. So I think we need one.